Bruchim Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Pei Beis Amud Beis. Starting with Daf Pei Beis Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the bottom. Our Mishnah states that if a Korban Pesach is nitma or it's yotza, then it's to be burnt immediately. The Gemara explains that which is nitma is understood because there's a Beferish apostle teaching me that when the carbon becomes nitma, then it's to be burnt right away. The pasuk says that outright. But in regards to yotza, where do we know that to be true? The Gemara brings from the carbon chatos of Aaron HaKohen. That carbon chatos should be brought on the outside mizbeach. If the blood is to be brought inside or out of its designated place, it's yotza, then we learn out that it's to be burnt right away. The Gemara now asks, Bishlama nitma. We understand why nitma is a good limud. Why? Because the pasuk that's talking about that it's nitma to be burned right away is talking about kachim kalim. And therefore says the Gemara, Goli rachmana bekachim kalim, kol shekain bekachim kadashim. Then we can make a kol shekain that the kachim kadashim, which has a higher standard, should be burnt right away. Ela yoitze eshkechan kachim kadashim. Kachim kalim minolan. But the chatos, which is kachim kadashim, that which teaches me it should be burnt right away. How do I know kachim kalim, which is less of a degree of severity? Minolan. Where do I know kachim kalim means to be indeed burnt if it's yotza? Says the Gemara Vesu, and further, hodetanya, that which states in the Brisa lon dama, when the blood of the carbon is left overnight. We're on top Pei Beis Amud Beis on the top, nishpach dama, or the blood is spilled of the carbon. Yotza dama chutz liklayim, or the dam goes out of this designated place, outside of the curtains or the azara. The kaimalon besreifa. How do I know that this carbon must be burnt right away? Minolon. Says Gemara, Nafka Lon mit Rabbi Shimon. We learn it out from Rabbi Shimon's drasha. The Tanya, it says, Rabbi Shimon Oimer, Ba'kodesh, Ba'eis Tisarif. Limeid, Rabbi Shimon says, from here we learn out, Al Chatos, She Sreifasa B'kodesh, that the carbon Chatos, it's to be burnt in the place of the Kodesh, Dahainu, the place where it's supposed to be brought. And therefore, that's the place where it's supposed to be burnt. Still, enli elo zu bilvad. I only know this carbon chatos, which is kache kadashim alone. Psule kadashim ve'emur kachim kalim. Shar psule kadashim ve'emur kadashim kalim minayin. Where do I know other carbonos that they also should be burnt? Tamulomer v'chol ba'kodesh ba'esh tisarif. There, the word v'kol in the beginning of the pasuk is superfluous to include other karbonos of kache kadoshim and kache kalim when the avarim are burnt on the mizbeach. Now, there's even kache kalim, which is a lesser degree of severity, and can go ahead and be burnt. Can be even taken outside of the azara, as long as it's eaten within the walls of the Yushalayim. But the Avarim, the parts of the Kachik Kalim that are put on the Mizbeach, they have the din of Kachik Kadoshim. So here we learn out from the fact that this is V'kol, teaching me that all of these Karbonos also are to be burnt as well. Says the Gemara, Elakol Psule B'Kachik Sreifa, the Gemara says that should be burnt. Ultimately, the Gemara says, however, that indeed it's Allah Moshe Sinai. We can't learn out from the chatos of Aaron because that's again limited. That which is the kol really only teaches me where. But it doesn't teach me that it should all be burnt. From that we only know that which becomes posel, even if it's shar kachim kadoshim, or those kachim kalim that are burnt on the mizbeach, the avarim that are burnt on the mizbeach, how do we know when they become posel they have to be burnt? From that it's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Now the Gemara goes back and says, our Mishnah states if there's an intrinsic psul in the carbon, it's to be burnt right away. Only that which is going to be something that is secondary, that's for the bailim that are pasul, do we say that it has to be left overnight as noisar and then be burnt? The Gemara now challenges this from a brais of the Bei Rabba Bar Avua. The Omar, he said, afilu pigul ton ibur tzura. Even pigul, which is intrinsic to the carbon itself, it's a psul in the carbon itself, when the bailim have in mind to eat the carbon outside of his designated time of pigul, that pigul is intrinsically, it's a psul in the goof of the carbon. Yet, in this brisa that's taught by Rabba Bar Avua, we're saying that you have to leave it till ibur tzura, until there's noisar, and then burn it. So that's contrary to our Mishnah. Ask the Gemara Minolon, from where do we know this brisa to support what it's saying that the pigul should be tying ibur tzura? Yolif ovon minoisar. Just like by noisar, the pasuk states by noisar, v'hanefesh ha'ocheles mimeno avoino tisa. One who eats noisar, then he shall carry the iniquity. So it's used the word avoin. And yet also it states, in regards to pigul, it says in the pasuk, v'hanefesh ha'ocheles mimeno avoino tisa. I'm sorry, by noisar, it's v'oichlov avono yisa. The one who eats it, the avono yisa. And by pigul, it states what I said before, nefesh ha'acheles mimena avono tisa. So both places it says avon. It says avon in regards to noisar, and avon in regards to pigul. Now noisar, by definition, is meat that's left over. And from here we're laying out that just as that noisar is to be burned, so too the pigul, only when it's left over as noisar is, should be burnt. Not right away, but rather as noisar. That's what ibur tzura is. So therefore, that's the limud. Ask the Gemara, why are you learning out from noisar? Ask the Gemara, neilaf ovon mechatas da'aron. The chatas da'aron also has the word ovon in its pasuk. There it states, v'oisa nosen lachem laseh, says ovon ha'eda. You'll carry the oven of the people, lechaper aleim lifnei Hashem. So why not learn out pigul from the chatas da'aron? And chatas da'aron is burnt right away. So the pigul should also be burnt right away. Answers the Gemara, maloch chatos da'aron ki agavna nami ibur tzura l'doros boy. Even in regards to the chatas da'aron requires ibur tzura for all the future generations. That which it was only burnt right away was an exception. As the Gemara says now, v'hasam harosho haisa, the actual carbon of Aaron, that was burnt right away because that was a specific time. But all the other chatos the Aaron for the future generation would require to be left over. Says the Gemara, Hashta da amina kol psule de kodesh b'sreifa. Now that we have said that all the kodshim that become pasul has to be burnt, and we learned it out from a halach l'mosh misinai. Lo yishna de kodshe kadoshim lo yishna kodshim kalim gemara gemirei lo. We have a mesara halach l'mosh misinai. Ask the Gemara then bekodesh ba'es tisarif lamali. What do I need the pasuk of bekodesh ba'es tisarif? Answers the Gemara, Ahumi boile shesreifosoi bakodesh. And we don't need it to teach me that when it's possible it has to be burnt. That we learn now halacha Moshe Sinai. But where is it burnt? That's burnt in the kodesh. From this pasuk we learned it out, because it says bekodesh be'es tisarif. Now ask the Gemara, v'habasa sheyiga bekol tamei lo yoichal be'es tisarif lamali. Again, why do we need this pasuk to teach me that it should be burnt when it's nitma? Hooray, we have a lach l'moshe Sinai. Says the Gemara, here it's different. I might think otherwise. Hahu legufa itztarich. I need it for itself. Why? Because salka daitech amino. I might think to say kol psule de kodesh kegoin lon dama. All of those karbonas that become pasul, where, for example, the dam stays overnight, v'nishbach dama, or the dam is spilled. V'yotza dama, or the dam goes out of its designated area. V'nishchata b'layla, or the carbon is nishchat at night, making the carbon pasul. Then the besreifa, they have to be burnt. Why? The lesnu bechulin. They have no shaychis bechulin. We're talking about korbanos over here. So therefore, when the carbon becomes pasul, it has to be burnt. However, aval nitma the bechulin nami mifsil. When it comes to something that was nitma, that's also shaykh to something that is chulin, that can also become tamei. So therefore, I might think, when it comes to a carbon that becomes nitma, which is shaykh to also something that is non-carbon, not kaddish, like chulin, I might think then it doesn't require to be burnt. It's enough to then be buried, enough so that it doesn't become eaten up by other things, by animals, and it doesn't become ruined in its kedusha. That's enough just to be buried, but it doesn't have to be burnt. Kamash malan, it has to be burnt. The Gemara now quotes the seif of our Mishnah, Nitmu habayli moshamesu to ubar tzirosan. Unlike the reisha that says when something intrinsic to the carbon becomes nitma, or it's yatsa, then it has to be burnt right away. But if it's something that's the bailim that's nitma, or the bailim are mesu, then you have to wait till tzura to ubar tzurasan for the next day, where it becomes noisa, and then to be burnt. The Mishnah also brings an opinion of Rav Yochanan ben Broika that argues, and he says, Av ze yisarif miyad, lefi she'ein loy oichlin. Says the Gemara, Omar Rav Yosef machloikes shenitmu bailim achar zrika. Their machloikes is only a machloikes after that the bailim became nitma, only after the zrika. Because then the basar is really roy for achila. Aval nitmu bailim lifnei zrika delo ischaze basar laachila difra kol yisar miyad. But if the bailim became nitma before the zrika, then everybody would agree, according to even the Tanakama, that the korban would be nisraf right away. Meisvei, the Gemara asks from the following brisa, Zehaklal, it states in the following principle: Kol she psuloi begufoi, anything that has intrinsic psul in the carbon, then yisarif miyad, then that psul requires that it be burnt right away. Bedam uve if it's something that's not intrinsic to the carbon itself, but rather the dam or the bailim, that's not the goof of the carbon, that becomes either, let's say, the dam spills or the bailim become nitma, then to ubar tzurosoi, then you have to wait till the carbon changes its form, namely, it becomes noisar, and then to burn it. V'yetzi lebeis hasreifa. So here we see Ktani bailim dumya de dam. We have a comparison of bailim to dam. Ma dam lifnei zrika, af bailim lifnei zrika. Just as the dam became either nishbach, or something happened to the dam before the zrika, because it was after the zrika, obviously, then the dam is good. So obviously it took place before the zrika. And still, we're saying it's compared to the bailim. So it must be the bailim is also lifnei hazrika. Ella, so it must be then, that even then, everybody would agree that we see that with lifnei zrika, it would be possible. Not like the Gemara was saying before, that lifnei zrika, everybody would agree, including the Tanakam, that we burnt right away. Here we see not like that. Ella i'itmar hochi itmar. Rather, you must say that this is what he is saying. Machlokes shenitmu bailim lifnei zrika. The machlokes is only if the bailim became tamei before the zrikas hadam. The lo is chazi basar la'achila. Then, since the basar was not fitting, there's a machlokes. The havale kipsula begufoi. Then there's a machlokes when there's a psul in the goof. The Tanakama says it's not yet considered to be a psul in the goof, but over here Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika says it is, and therefore to be burnt right away. Aval nitbu bailim la'achar zrika. But if the balim became tamei after the zrikas hadam, this chaze basar lachila divrei hakol psuloi machmas davar acher uboy ibor tzur. Then even Rabbi Yochanan ben Roika would agree with the Tanakama that you'd have to wait until the carbon becomes ibor tzura to then burn it. Rabbi Yochanan argues and says, af la'achar zrika nami machlekes. They're arguing also in a case where the balim became tamei even after the zrika. The other Rabbi Yochanan Taimei, the Gemara says, this is Rabbi Yochanan l'shitasoi. Dom Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, Rabbi Nechemya, Omru davar echad. They said the same thing. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika hodaman. That we saw already in our Mishnah that he holds that indeed is burnt right away. Rabbi Nechemya, my hai. Where do we see Rabbi Yochanan? Nechemya shita. The Tanya, it says in the Brisa, Rabbi Nechemya oimer, mibnei aninus nisrafuzu. The reason why Aaron HaKohen says that I did not eat this carbon chatos is because I was in a state of aninus, because Nadav Avihu died, and therefore I and my children cannot eat the carbon chatos, and there's nobody else to eat it, so we have to burn it. Lekach ne'emar be'el ka'ela. V'ho aninus kela'achar zrika dahavya. And aninus is the same thing as after the dam was already nizrak. Ki itzroif la'alter nistrof. And therefore, just as in the case of aninus, we say that it's burnt right away, so too over here, in the case of la'achar zrika, it's burnt right away. So Rabbi Yochanan the Shitoso says that Nechemya goes together with the sheet of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika that they should be burnt right away. On top of Hey Gimam and Aleph. Rabba adds another Tana that says it also should be burnt right away. Af Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the Tanya Yossi Aglili Oimer Kol HaInyan, the entire matter Kuloi Einoi Medaber Ella Beporim HaNisrofim Ubesiire HaNisrofim. It's talking about a carbon chatos that belongs on the inside, and therefore he says Lisroif Psuleihem Abeis Abiro. If it was brought in its proper place, then we take what we're supposed to do is take the carbon, we're supposed to bring it outside of Yerushalayim and burn it. But if it was disqualified, became posul, then Lisroi Psuleihem Abeis Abiro V'litein Loisase Al Achilason, then it has to be burnt in the Beis Habira, and you cannot consume it. Omru Loi, they said back to Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, Chato shenichnas dama lifnai v'lifnim minayim. You're saying over here that there's a carbon chatos that's lifnim, talking about the parim hanisrofim, the seir nisrofim. So how will you know that a para, that a carbon chatos rather of the chitzoin, that if it's brought, the blood is brought inside where the heichal is, that's going to then be poisel? Where's your limud for that? Omar lehen, he says to them, Hein lo ichuvo es dama el hakodesh pnima. Michlal, from here we see the inafik ihi, that if the carbon went outside of its designated place, meaning outside of the azara, inami al dama, or that the dam was brought inside of the heichal, then besreifa has to be burnt. Rabbi Yochanan Sova, why did Rabbi Yochanan not hold of this, of what Rabbi is saying, that indeed Rabbi Yossi HaGalili would be a third Tana that says you should burn it right away? Says the Gemara, because dam ubasa chada milsihi. That which Rabbi Yossi HaGalili says, talking about dam and basar. That which is dam and basar, that's one matter, and therefore there it should be burnt right away. But Bailim milsa achritihi, that which we said before, named from Nechemya and Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, let's talk about the Bailim that were nitma. And therefore, who's to say that Rabbi Yossi HaGalili would agree with them?